All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm Rebecca Fox. I'm the Assistant Manager of Family Services at New Canaan Library, and I am so happy to have you all here for our holiday book buzz for families with Heidi from Elm Street Book. Third get together of this type. We did one last year for the holidays and one over the summer as well. And so we're just going to share some new books starting with preschool all the way through young adult. Things from the last year that we're really excited about that could either make good holiday gifts or could just make any time, kind of if you're looking for a new reading recommendation for a family member. I'll toss it over to Heidi to say hello.
Hi, and I'm so excited to talk about my books as always.
I can get us started with some picture books. I'm just going to do a little screen share because most of the books that I'm talking about are pretty popular right now and are actually checked out from the library. So we're going to go starting with picture books and then run up through middle grade and then YA. The first picture book that I'm super excited about this year is Endlessly Ever After. It's a choose your own adventure fairy tale picture book. And we've had a lot of families lately looking for choose your own adventure stories, and there are the great You Choose chapter books, but there haven't been very many that you could read with either sort of the early elementary set, or that you could do as kind of a whole family, just sit down and read aloud together. Or this is also one that I think if people are looking for mystery readers for the schools could be really fun to take into a classroom. So this is Endlessly Ever After, Pick Your Path to Countless Fairy Tale Endings. It brings in Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs, a whole bunch of Sleeping Beauty, a whole bunch of sort of fairy tale characters that you'll recognize. And it starts out with this sort of rhyming story. So at this point where with Riding Hood, and so a wolf is waiting by the path out in the morning sun. I like your fine red cap, he says. You heading someplace fun? Almost every spread or two, you have a choice to make. So now what, Rosie? Are you going to let that wolf scare you away from your adventure? And then you can decide, yes, wolves are no joke. Go back inside and start fresh tomorrow. Turn to page 2. Or not going to be scared off. Take a deep breath, journey on, turn to page 50. So there are just tons of different endings, tons of different ways that you can meet all the different fairy tale characters. I would say this is a great one for the early elementary set. There are some dark endings, sometimes that you get eaten. So probably not for the super, super young, but for that kind of kindergarten to even like 4th grade, I think they'll just really love seeing all the different ways that they can make the stories go. You guys may know if you're already diehard Pigeon fans, but just want to make sure everyone knows that in September, a new Pigeon book came out. The Pigeon Will Ride the Roller Coaster, words and pictures by Mo Willems. If you're looking for just a surefire gift for the preschool set, the Pigeon never fails. And Pigeon is in his usual super over the top excited form here. Roller coasters. I have been a quiver with anticipation ever since I first heard about them. The Pigeon can't wait to ride the roller coaster, but first Pigeon needs a ticket. Pigeon needs to wait in line. Pigeon needs to be brave, and Pigeon has great expectations to go up and around these big loop-de-loops, which may or may not be what the roller coaster is really like. This is also a fun preparation if anyone's going to a fair or a theme park soon, but whether one's been on a roller coaster or not, Pigeon is always a hit. Tofu Takes Time. We just had 2 very silly books that I was talking about. This is sort of the sweet counterpart. So this one is just so beautiful. It's a little girl and her grandmother, and they are making tofu by hand. The little girl, there's a lot of steps to make the tofu. The little girl is starting to get impatient. So we strain the soy milk through cheesecloth into a pot, pitter, pitter, patter. It takes so long, I say. Why don't we buy tofu from the supermarket? And Nene explains, handmade tofu is good and good things take time. And so it alternates between the story of the girl and her grandmother together making tofu and more information that her grandmother shares about where the tofu comes from and where everything that helps them make the tofu comes from. So it takes time, but it also takes heat and metal from the sun and the earth. And you see them heating the pot and you see the metal of the pot. And so it takes you every step, alternates between the girl and her grandmother spending quality time together and between the girl learning about something outside the bigger world that makes it possible for them to have their tofu. And so it's just a really gorgeous family story and a really gorgeous just appreciating everything around you and how many different things come together to make something relatively simple. And then my last picture book, A is for B. And it's an alphabet book in translation. So if you're looking for a different kind of alphabet book, instead of the typical T is for tiger or F is for fish, in many languages, the word for tiger begins with the letter H. So you have huli in Kannada, harimau in Indonesian. Same I is for fish, and it goes through Zulu and Malay and Tagalog, Javanese. And so turns your language expectations on their head a little bit, but it's also still that alphabet book that does say kind of, here's one letter, here are all the words that start with that letter. It's also just got these really gorgeous line drawings. It's kind of an art book in itself. So I just really love this one. I think it's gorgeous and just a little bit different from a lot of what's been out there. And I will toss it over to Heidi, who has some additional fabulous picture books.
I brought them all here because we have them all in the store. Yay. My first, which was very popular at the beginning of the year because it has a classroom setting, is Rick the Rock of Room 214 by Julie Falatko and illustrated by Ruth Chan. This is the story about a rock. His name is Rick, and he's a nature find. So he sits up on the shelf with an acorn, a piece of bark, I believe, something else that the children have collected from outside. Needless to say, Rick is bored. He wants adventure. He thinks it's far more exciting to be outside because he believes that's where he came from. So he needs to go back. So he determines that he is going to go outside because he hears the teacher talking about all these cool things that rocks have done over the centuries and through time, and with regard to science and volcanoes, etc. So he decides to go outside. Well, his adventure isn't exactly what it's all cracked up to be, and something happens where he realizes that life wasn't so bad up on the shelf. It's very funny. It's a great read aloud. It's wonderful for children, for boys and girls. It doesn't skew either way. The illustrations are really fun. As you can see, he gets rained on. There's lightning. There's mud. Inside's not so bad at all. But anyway, it's super fun. You'll be laughing. It's great. Kids love this book. My next choice, oh my gosh, this is hilarious too. I dare you. This is much shorter, so probably for younger children because it's about a sentence or two a page. It's King Kong's Cousin by Mark Teague, and you probably know Mark Teague from The Three Little Pigs and The Somewhat Bad Wolf, and he was the illustrator of Cat Dog. So this is a story, needless, of King Kong's cousin, and his name is Junior, where King Kong is this big, brave, burly, exciting, dynamic gorilla. Junior is not. So I just want to read one page, which gives you the sense. Kong was the most famous gorilla in the city. His cousin Junior was not famous at all. And it goes on to say, where Kong was as big as an apartment, Junior lived in an apartment. So it's very funny. Boys will howl, so will girls, but the illustrations are beautiful. He's really sweet, Junior. And something, Junior is unfortunately put in a situation where he has to do something very courageous like Kong. So he gets a sense of importance toward the end of the book, where in the beginning he's very, he's not very sure of himself. So this is fabulous. It sends a great message. The next book that I have, which I really, really love, and it was popular during Halloween because it has gorgeous illustrations. It's a little spooky. It's not for every child if they're afraid of the dark. It's called Beatrice Likes the Dark, or maybe it's good for children who are afraid of the dark because Beatrice's sister likes the light. So where Beatrice wears dark clothing, loves spooky, scary things, likes to be up late at night, her sister, Rue, likes the light. And you'll see on alternating pages where you'll have Rue enjoying the daytime, happier or happiest at night. And so it's really a picture book about differences and how two siblings can be quite different, but then find comfort in each other once they've, had conversations and explained their the choices that they've made. It's a wonderful book. I think it is. I don't want to say it's strictly Halloween. It's not, because it's just, kind of a spooky kind of picture book with the illustrations. But I think it is really important for children who have siblings who seem to think they're way too different to be able to get along, that they can find comfort and enjoy and accept each other's differences. I think it's wonderful. And my last picture book, all right, which is so fun, and I think will be a classic someday. I'm going to put my money on it. This is called The Stocking Stuffer, written by Holly Merriweather. She came in the other day because she was driving through and signed all her copies. What I love about this, not only is it called The Stocking Stuffer, it fits in stockings. If you have wide stockings, it's adorable. This is the story of Tiny. I think his name is Tiny, and they call him, oh no, Tinsel, sorry. His name is Tinsel. Santa Claus brings all I'll start over. There are no children on the naughty list. So Santa Claus has a problem. He can't get to all the houses and put all the presents under the trees and the stockings because there's nobody on the naughty list. Everybody's been good this year. So he has to enlist Tinsel to help him, to split the duties. So Tinsel goes with Santa, and he's the stocking stuffer. While Santa's busy under the tree, Tinsel scurries around and starts filling all the stockings. Well, obviously there's an adventure and something happens. And Tinsel does such a great job that Santa asks him to come along the following year. So charming. The illustrations are really beautiful. Like I said, I think it will be a classic. And the story, it's not a short, not really short, but it's not really long. And it's just delightful. And all kids of all ages will be riveted to see what happens next. I absolutely love it. It's so adorable. And he sleeps in a little matchbox. He's just the best. So I thought I'd bring in a Christmas pick.
You easy readers. Well, so sort of books for the kids who are just beginning to read on their own. So the first one is the simplest, and it's I Did It by Michael Emberley. And so this one is fantastic for kids who are just really new readers. All about this little creature who is desperate to learn how to ride a bike. And starts out, I think I can do it, but he has some troubles. He goes crashing right into the tree. I can't do it. And every step of the way, as he tries to learn to ride this bike, I bam! And you see all of his kind of animal friends, toy friends, kind of watching. It's not going well. Eventually, I did it, but also the bike's broken in half. So it's a really goofy read. It really repeats these same sight words again and again, but in all different configurations. So it's great for kids who really just have a few very simple words, or are just learning to even sound out a couple of very simple syllables, but who also want a real story and who are learning to pay enough attention to word order that just switching around, I think I can do it, I can't do it, I did it, they mean very different things. And there's enough, the illustrations tell enough of the story that you have those visual breaks that kids who are learning to read really need. So it's a really brilliant, very new reader tale. It's part of a whole series of these comic readers, and these and the I Like to Read series, which I've talked about before, are both just wonderful for these brand new kids. Going to someone who's a slightly stronger new reader, but still relatively new, we've got It's a Sign. And this is part of the Elephant and Piggy like reading series. So it's not by Mo Willems, but it's an imprint of beginning reader books that are sort of in the same style and sense of humor as the Elephant and Piggy stories, which I know a lot of you probably will remember. Elephant and Piggy, they're huge hits still. So this one's by Jarrett and Jerome Pumphrey. And these four little creatures, who are named 1, 2, Cat, and 4, are working on signs. One of them got started and decided that he was going to make a sign for a club. All of them get very excited about this idea. And they know how to write a bunch of words. They know how to write cat. They know how to write hat. They know how to write all these kind of random words, and they can do things like make paper hats. They don't know what their club should be about. They just know that they need a sign for their club that they're all going to join. And so it's this really goofy story as they work together to make this sign, to write these different sight words, and to do their crafting, and then are left with the question at the end, well, we wrote all this stuff. What does it mean our club's about? And they come up with a really goofy, hilarious Elephant and Piggy worthy solution. And they're all super excited to start their mystery club. It's a good one for a laugh. It's a good one for kids who are just really proud that they can read and write a little bit on their own. And if you're missing those Elephant and Piggy over the top vibes, it's a great book to check out and a great series. And then for kids who are getting into the chapter book area, so kind of as a very early chapter book, Esme's Birthday Conga Line is one that I'm very excited about this year. It's a really sweet story. You can see it's a little bit of a longer read, but sort of in the Dory Phantasmagoria range, sort of level-wise. So that's solid readers, but not ready for the huge middle grade books. Probably first grade, second grade, maybe third. So Esme is spending her birthday with Grandma and Grandpa, Mimi and Pipo, and it is the first birthday that they're going to spend together. Esme's grandparents wrap up this great present. It turns out to be a guitar. It's wonderful. But Esme has a problem because her grandparents have forgotten to plan a birthday party for her. She says, I think that's how it is with grandparents. They don't know about parties or piñatas, about birthday cake or music, which maybe she's right, maybe she's not, but she decides that she needs to plan a party for herself. And she lives in this apartment building with all these very quirky characters, And she decides, I can make a piñata, I can bake a cake, I can play the music, I can plan a party all by myself. And she has her little cat sidekick, El Toro, who agrees. And so she sets out to plan her birthday with all the different people in her building helping her out. It's a really, really sweet family tale. It's a really sweet kind of community, neighbors, friends coming together. It's a great sort of that creative girl with the big imagination, ready to do things on her own. And it also builds in a lot of Spanish words, which is really lovely to see in the beginning reader books. And it does it in a way that non-Spanish speakers also can really understand what's being said, even though they are new to probably early chapter books in addition to the language. This is one that I strongly recommend. I was excited to see this. I think there should be more Esme stories coming out in 2023. I'm going to toss it back to Heidi for start us off with middle grade.
Okay, this is my chunk of book reviews because for some reason I read so many middle grade novels this year because they were so good. I couldn't keep up. So anyway, I will start with Violet and Joby in the Wild by Lynn Ray Perkins. She won the Newbery for Criss Cross. It has some wonderful black and white illustrations inside. It's the story of two mice that are house mice. And a mom and I think it's a boy one day set a trap for these two mice who have been living in the kitchen of all places. And they've been really enjoying everything the pantry has to offer between cookies and crackers and crumbs on the table or on the floor. And so they humanely trap the mice in a shoebox and they decide what to do with them. And they decide not to just release them in their backyard, but to take them to the local park because they think they will be so much happier there. Well, unbeknownst to them, these mice have never been outside of a house before. And so they're absolutely terrified because they have never seen a tree or grass or rocks or other insects or other creatures. And they are blown away by the vastness of the great outdoors. Well, a field mice happens to be walking along and befriends them and says, you know what, I'll show you how to survive out in the wild. And it's a wonderful story about courage and family because one of them is more daring than the other, and one of them relies on the other too much, and some adventures happen. Some get lost, some are found. It's darling, it's charming, it's funny, it's sweet, it's wonderful. It's for your early, I would say middle grade reader. It's just whoever likes to read about animals and adventure and family. They're really special. My next one is a wonderful book. And this came out end of September, around early October, and it's The Stars Did Wander Darkly by Colin Malloy. He is the author of the Wildwood Chronicles, which I'm not familiar with. I probably should have looked it up. He's also an indie folk singer that tours with his band. And they're out of Portland, Oregon, and they're called the Decemberists. I think he's also a film screenwriter. I don't know. He's extremely talented, whatever he is. However, this is for a boy or a girl who loves a little darkness, adventure, mystery. It's scary. It's about Archie and a group of his friends, girls and boys. And Archie's dad is working in construction, and his next job is to excavate this mountaintop or cliff where they're going to build a hotel or something, but it's an old estate that they have to tear down. Well, his father starts to excavate and uncovers this huge cave. And the minute that happens, all of a sudden, really strange things start happening around town, and you don't know what's going on. Strange people start showing up that they've never seen before. The parents start acting like zombies. A penny shows up on a doorstep, and then they go across town, and there's the same penny on somebody else's doorstep. So there's a lot of creepy, creepy scenarios here. It's so fast paced because you want to find out what's in the cave, who's in the cave, the history of the estate. It's very ghoulish, but it reminds me of a movie, and I'm going to date myself, that was called Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Was a movie about these pods that came from nowhere, and they would just take over your body, and you'd have like these zombies walking the earth. So good. I mean, I love the cover alone. Reminds me a little bit of E.T. I don't know why, but it's super for the middle schooler that's starting to want to read Stephen King and should probably read this first. It's awesome. Okay, so the next book that I am absolutely in love with, and I'm in love with this man, Kwame Alexander. He is a brilliant writer. He's known for the crossover. He's an incredible poet. He actually spoke at my son's college graduation. He wrote a poem for his university that was stunningly beautiful. This is called The Door of No Return. This is, I'm going to say, for the 10 and up reader, I think it might be a little scary for 8 and 9-year-olds, just because it is the story about Kofi, who lives in Africa, and in Ghana, which is now the country which is now known as Ghana. It takes place in the 1800s. And it's the story of family and, brothers and grandparents and wisdom and protecting your children from dangers. But it's just a wonderful story about family in Africa until slavery in the United States begins. And the British and the Americans are sent to Africa to go and round up slaves for the United States. So this is basically kind of the prequel to slavery, because I think it's wonderful where children will not only understand, it doesn't talk about slavery here, it talks about what happened before. And it's really heart-wrenching that how Kofi, is this innocent young boy who's just trying to grow up in his village and try and follow the rules, and then kind of stretches his boundaries and unfortunately gets caught up in something so huge that he has no idea what it is. And it ends, because I believe there is a sequel, it ends with an event, and he's lost. Unfortunately, he's put on a ship to the United States, and that's where it ends. It's difficult to read sometimes because it's really sad, and it makes you think, oh my gosh, all those slaves, unfortunately, that were brought here had all these families. And I think sometimes kids they just think, oh, slavery just started here. People were just brought here and that's it. But this is the backstory of some of the people and of how families were broken up in Africa. It's wonderful. And he's a beautiful writer. And what I love about this is also great for a reluctant boy reader, because some of the chapters are that long. And then some of the chapters are longer. And he just jumps around and tells a scene within very minimal words, but they are so profound. You can't imagine how he paints a scene. I'll just say it's a vision. There is no opening for light in this dank cell. So when they take us out each morning to relieve ourselves, our eyes cannot adapt, and we are nearly sightless to everything happening around us. I mean, something so short and profound gives you a sense of the dire situation that they're in. And it's just so moving. So like I said, 10 and up, because I think unless you want to read it with a younger child, if you think it's important, that's great. But I think some of it is so disturbing for younger children, and unless they're ready to have conversations. So that's that. Oh, I have to go faster because I have a few more. Okay, this is going to be a classic. Like I thought that Stocking Stuffer should. This is by C.C. Harrington. It's called Wild Oak, and it reads like a wonderful story about a young girl who has a stutter. And it reminds me a little bit of Mary Poppins, because the father was such a tyrant in Mary Poppins, and he was so strict and everything like that. And this reminds me of the father in this. He doesn't accept that his daughter has a disability and that she stutters. So he threatens to send her to a sanitarium or a hospital where they're going to correct this stuttering that she has. Well, she's heard horror stories where they send these children, and she begs and she pleads, please, please, I'll stop stuttering. I'll do anything to not go to this hospital. Well, so her mother decides, okay, let's see what we can come up with. And she agrees to send her to her grandfather, who she does not know, in the countryside. Takes place in England. So she is sent to the countryside to convalesce and to get rid of her stutter. Meantime, there's a snow leopard that is given as a gift from Harrods to this very wealthy woman in England. Well, she comes home one day and the snow leopard has absolutely destroyed her flat and all her wealthy possessions, and she has an absolute hissy fit and tells her brother, I don't want the snow leopard, get rid of it. Fast forward, the snow leopard gets released into Wild Oak, where this girl is living with her grandfather, and she takes a walk one day and there's a sighting of this white leopard, snow leopard, and no one believes her. So that's where the adventure begins. The snow leopard is lost. He doesn't belong there. She's lost. She doesn't belong there. And in meeting each other, they kind of heal each other. It is such a wonderful story. It's got so many twists and turns. It's delightful, and it will be a classic. It just reads like such a classic. I love that book. Anyway, next, Gordon Corman, make it fast. Gordon Corman, Restart. This is his 100th book. He says he wants to write 200. It's called The Fort. It's great. It's about a bunch of kids, boys and girls, who discover a hidden bomb shelter after a hurricane. The bomb shelter's in the woods. It has electricity. It has running water. It has food. It even has a TV. They make a pact. They say, don't tell anybody. This is just our place. This is our hangout. And then, something happens. I think one of the boys had a girlfriend and he had to tell her, and you know how that goes. So that means that it's no longer a secret, and instead of it just being a cool hangout, it becomes a refuge for one of the boys who's having a family situation. And then it becomes a refuge for his mom. It's great. It does address some domestic violence, but not to the point where it's cringeworthy, but you get the gist of what's happening, and the boys and kind of gather around and they save the day. It's wonderful. I have to tell you a funny story. A boy came in with like two of his friends. They were all in middle school, and they were going in between the bookshelves, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this. It's awesome. And the kid was like, you're reading what? And he's like, The Fort. He goes, you got to read it. He literally took it and slammed it in his friend's chest, and he goes, you're reading this. This is awesome. And I had just finished it, and I was like, yeah, you've got to read it. And there were so many cool boys, different personalities. And I said to the one boy that had read it, he goes, do you want to know who I think I am in this story? I go, no, tell me. So he told me, he goes, I really relate with the kid that is the new kid, and everybody doesn't want to include him, and then they do, and he saves the day. I'm like, that's awesome. He goes, that's why I want him to read it. I go, well, you go ahead. You get all your friends to read it. He was so excited. I loved it. And last but not least, this is amazing. Natalie Lloyd wrote Hummingbird. Natalie Lloyd, the author, has brittle bone disease. So she wrote a book about a girl in a wheelchair who, Olive is her name, who has brittle bone disease. She's homeschooled, but she's desperate for friends. She has no friends because she never gets to go to middle school, because if anybody bumps into her, if she falls, and she's wheelchair bound, although she can walk, but if she walks, she has to walk on crutches. And if she knocks into something, she could break a bone. So anyway, she convinces her parents to let her go to school. Well, obviously something happens the very first day. There's a story that is parallels, and the reason it's called Hummingbird is because there's a magical hummingbird that also is coming back to town after 30 years or something like that. And so she decides that if I can go to school, and on my way to school or with my new friends that I hopefully can find a best friend, we can go in search of this hummingbird because it's magic. And if you see the hummingbird, you are granted a wish. So the only way she's going to find the hummingbird if she stays in school and she gets to create some sort of um, map of how to find this hummingbird. And there's a history of the hummingbird, and it's just awesome. She's funny. It's great for people who loved Out of My Heart, or Out of My Mind. Is it right? It's Out of My Mind and Out of My Heart. Funny, humorous. Everybody rallies around her. There's a great, she wants to become, you see her on the stage. She loves to be in plays and act and sing and do all that kind of stuff. So it's really empowering. It's inspirational. It's a little magic, boy, girl, but I think it's really a wonderful, profound read. And Natalie Lloyd did a great job. I mean, she knows obviously what this little girl obviously is going through. So it's awesome. It's a really fun book. So there we go. Sorry that took too long, but I love middle school books.
No, that's great. And I think I've got some middle grade as well. And so I've got kind of one chapter book and then a bunch of graphic novels too for that sort of middle grade set. So got Omar Rising, which is the sort of companion book to Amal Unbound, which I think a couple of you may know people who have read. Maybe you read it yourself. So got Omar Rising. Omar is living in Pakistan. He's the son of a servant, and he gets the opportunity, he earns a scholarship to go to this fancy boarding school. And Omar is so excited. He is going to join the soccer team. He's going to make all these friends. He's going to sort of have this great school experience that he's been waiting for. Unfortunately, when Omar gets to the school, it turns out that the scholarship kids sort of have to earn their place. So they're not allowed to join the sports teams. And after classes, they have to do extra work to sort of a work study type thing, to earn their keep. And Omar's not happy about this, but he's going to sort of struggle on, make friends, do what he can. And then he learns that in addition to all of that, the kids who are there on scholarship have to get better grades than the kids who pay tuition just to be able to stay in school. And so Omar's held to this sort of unreasonably high standard, and he and the other scholarship kids are at risk of being kicked out. It's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back for Omar. He sees that this is completely unfair. There's this double standard, and there's really no reason for it except prejudice. And so Omar decides that he's going to find a way to fight the system and stand up for himself and for all the other kids who are in his situation. Omar has just a really great group of friends. Omar's Amal's friend from Amal Unbound, so you may recognize a bunch of the characters crossing over. He's got guts. He's a kid who you can really easily relate to. It's a great school story, a great finding your voice story, a great what do you do when something just doesn't seem right. So this one's really beautiful. This one is my one sort of typical novel rec, largely because I knew that Heidi was recommending lots of wonderful middle grade novels as well. And then I'm going to go into a bunch of also really lovely middle grade graphic novels that came out in this past year. So we've got Miss Quince. So this one is about a girl named Sue who really just wanted to go to sleepaway camp this summer. And she's not pleased because she was all set to go to camp with her friends. She likes to write. She wanted to sort of spend the summer reading and writing and just telling stories with her friends. And her mom decided that instead they're going to Honduras to visit her family. And so Sue and her siblings and her mom and dad get loaded into this car and loaded onto the plane, and they're off to see all these relatives who Sue really doesn't want to spend time with. And the relatives live in the middle of nowhere, and there's no cell service, there's no television. She's just really stuck with this family. And that's not great. And then Sue finds out that part of the reason they're there is her mom has planned to surprise her with a quinceañera service, their celebration. And so this is Sue's 15. In her culture, she's supposed to have this basically huge kind of coming out party almost to recognize this big milestone in her life. Sue does not want this. She's not someone who wants to put on the big dress and be the center of attention and have this big celebration. And her grandmother starts to find ways to help her, maybe make her some compromises, maybe help her family understand a little bit where she's coming from, but make her understand where her family's coming from as well. And then her grandmother has a health problem, and the relationship that was this one really great relationship for her that was going to maybe be the saving grace shifts a little as well. It's a really great one for anyone who sort of is in that Raina Telgemeier sort of reading group, people who love Smile or Guts. It's that family dynamics, finding your own voice, finding a group of friends who can recognize who you are and celebrate that. And it's got sort of a very similar that art style too. Smaller Sister, I would say that Miss Quince could work well for sort of the whole middle grade set, starting with like 4th grade. Smaller Sister, I would probably say upper middle school or even into high school. And this one, it's really beautiful, really well done. It definitely deals with some tougher issues. So Lucy and her big sister Olivia have always done everything together. Growing up as kids, they were so close. It was like Olivia could read Lucy's mind. And Olivia showed Lucy how to do, they're 20 months apart. Olivia would show Lucy how to do absolutely everything. And Lucy could always trust that she would be there. And then something happens. So Olivia starts to change. She stops wanting to hang out with Lucy. She starts acting a little secretively. And Lucy eventually realizes that Olivia's struggling with middle school. She's developed an eating disorder. And the book sort of looks at her whole family is very supportive. They kind of rally around. They take Olivia to all the right doctors. They start trying to find ways to help her. And Olivia begins to heal. But in the process, Olivia is also the center of attention, and Lucy suddenly doesn't have anyone to turn to. And the family winds up moving. And just when things look like they're getting back to normal, Lucy is suddenly in a new school with bullies and kids who she's not really connecting to, and she doesn't really feel like she can turn to Olivia or turn to her parents because there's so much going on with Olivia. And so Lucy begins to struggle on her own. And it's kind of how these sisters start to have this connection that's a little bit torn apart. And then how they manage to put it back together, how each of them finds a way to be okay again. It's really hopeful. It's really a great look at family dynamics. It's a great look at when somebody has a health issue and what that can do with everybody else in the family as well. It's a thought-provoking one. It's a beautiful one. Not necessarily the most cheery, but it ends on a great note. That's Swim Team by Johnny Christmas. And so it's one that you'll see there's a quote from Jerry Craft at the beginning. It's one that if you liked New Kid, sort of those school stories about a kid just finding their place, finding their voice, this is a really great one. So Swim Team, there's a girl named Bree who moves from the city to Florida. And she arrives at the school in Florida and is trying to find a way to fit in. And it's a sort of strange school for her because Bree is terrified of swimming. And unfortunately, this school is all about their swim team and has this long history of swim competitions. And is just, that's what's important. And Bree is hoping that she can just avoid the swimming situation altogether. But of course, she winds up stuck with a swimming elective. Bree now has to face her fear. And in the building that she's moved into, there's a woman named Etta, who is an older woman who had been captain of the swim team many, many years ago when she was Bree's age. And Etta decides that she's going to find a way to help Bree. And so Etta helps Bree overcome her fear of swimming, and suddenly Bree's in a position where she could actually be the one to take their team to the championships. And so that is all fantastic. The caveat, they're going to be up against a team that has, from a private school that has a lot more resources than they do. And so Bree starts to learn from Etta, and just from comparing what her school has in terms of practice facilities to what this other school has, she starts to learn that there's a history of sort of different schools and having access to different qualities of just athletic equipment, different opportunities. She starts to learn about a history of segregation in public pools and how that history kind of has trickled even into sort of the current day. So she's starting to look at systemic racism a little bit. So it's just a really beautiful story of kind of her piecing together the way that the past and the present work. There's this sort of recurring puzzle imagery that comes through. And it's also just a really beautiful sort of new girl in school finding her voice. This one can work well for the whole middle school range, I think. And then Speak Up is my last graphic novel of the season that I'm recommending. Though there were a lot of good ones this year. So Speak Up, Mia is 12 years old and she's on the autism spectrum. And she has a great friend, Charlie, who's non-binary. And so for Mia and Charlie, they both find a way to express themselves through singing and songwriting. at school, people don't really get them. They're sometimes bullied, but they're sometimes just not really on people's radar at all. But when they sing, they actually form this group LQ that goes viral online. And no one at school knows that Mia and Charlie are LQ. And then they get a chance to sing live in a talent show. And the question is, do Charlie is ready to do it, and Mia isn't so sure. Does she want people to know about this side of her? And does she want to put herself out there? And so the question is sort of, what do they do? And what happens if everyone knows more wholly who they are? So it's just another really beautiful kind of finding yourself, finding your voice. It's just a really well done look. And then I wanted to give a shout out also to the History Smashers series. So this one, for our nonfiction readers out there, there's a whole series of these. The most recent one is the Underground Railroad. About a year ago, they had Plagues and Pandemics come out. There's one about the Mayflower. So they go through a lot of different topics, and they present in sort of, they're smashing what you thought you knew. So they take everything that you thought you knew about some of these really well-trod topics, things like the Underground Railroad that we hear about all the time. But they say you thought you knew this, but in reality, it's much more complicated. And so you learn a lot of facts that you really will be surprised by. I would recommend these strongly for people who like sort of I Survived, people who like Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. I think Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales is a really great comparison. These are a little less goofy in some parts, but they have a lot of characters that you can really latch on to. I'm showing some examples from the pandemic one, Plagues and Pandemics. And so part of the story is told in these sort of graphic novel panels that really remind me of the Nathan Hale style. And then there are parts that are straight narrative, parts that are these sort of sidebars where you get to know in depth kind of different theories and get to meet different characters from history. So it's just a really well done sort of History Smashers is the perfect title for it. It's a really good kind of breaking down what you thought you knew, and you leave with a lot more than you had. I'm going to toss it back to Heidi for a few YA.
Okay, so as I was saying earlier, I'm a huge middle school reader. I do on occasion read YA. I did not read as much this fall and summer because I'm a very linear thinker, and a lot of YA is really out there and a lot of fantasy, a lot of stuff that I can't even follow. I'm not going to lie. That's just the way it is. So I'm going to start with a book that I spoke about earlier. I don't even know. I can't remember, Rebecca, if it was in the summer or in the spring, or I don't know when we did it, but I loved this book so much when I first read it last year or in the beginning of the year. And the reason I'm bringing it up again is because she won the National Book Award for YA. So it's All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. If any of you have heard me speak about it before, it's YA. It's great. I have recommended it to women who are our age or my age. They've done it for their book clubs. They have passed it on. They've even said it was one of the best books they read all year. It takes place in California. It's the story of two Pakistani friends, Sal and Noor, and they're two really close family friends. They're in high school. Noor works at her uncle's liquor store after school. She's attempting to get into an Ivy League school. She's really smart. She has a backstory. Her uncle brought her from Pakistan after an event that happened there to her family, and you read about that. Sal, on the other hand, is really help is more of a traditionalist and helps his family. His parents own a local motel that is not doing well because his mother has some health issues. And he is trying to manage school as well as help the family business. They are best friends. They rely on each other, and they have a huge falling out. And after the falling out, they don't speak to each other, and both of their individual worlds start to spiral out of control. I can't tell you why. You have to read the book. But it's how they are brought together again in crisis to support each other. Not everything goes well. Some things do, some things don't. It is so full of talking points, whether it's being a first generation Pakistani or Irish American or German American or Italian or whatever. It's about young people coming to this country with immigrant parents that are trying to fit in and try, to live the American dream. And they have outside influences that unfortunately kids who are born here don't understand. It's just incredibly full of heart and heartache and courage and bad decisions, but meaning to do the right thing, but just being too young to think things through. It's just amazing. I wish everyone could read this book. I am that passionate about it, and she so deserved this award. She really, it was just incredible. When I heard the news, I ran around the bookstore like a chicken with its head cut off. It was embarrassing. Anyway, the next book, I did not read either one of these. I just know that these authors are very popular in YA. Their books are on the bestseller list continually. This is a prequel. The First to Die at the End. The first book was They Both Die at the End. It's by Adam Silvera. It's a story about this company called the Death Cast. If you receive a phone call from the Death Cast, that means you have 24 hours to live and you have to make some decisions. This takes place prior to the Death Cast being formed, or knowing what the Death Cast is. So this is about people. This is a story about a young man who has a serious heart condition and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So he signs up to be part of the Death Cast to find out when and if he's going to die from his heart condition. So it's all about how you spend the last 24 hours of your life, and who with, and how you make changes or keep things the same or whatever. But he's gotten great. I mean, I think They Both Die at the End won every like top 10 list when it first came out. So this one now I think is number one, as of last week, was number one on bestseller for YA. This is, many of you may know if you have older children, this is the new Marissa Meyer. Her New York Times bestseller Gilded was a huge success. This is for the queen of fairy tale. She's the queen of fairy tale telling book author. It's fantasy, girl fantasy. It's I guess it's the fictional, it's an inventive Rumpelstiltskin, so to speak. So there's a lot of I can't explain it because it's in a kingdom far away with a lot of wild things going on. But there's romance, there's betrayal, there's adventure, but it's for all those girls that love getting lost in some fairy tale kingdom with princes and queens and kings and just a lot of things that I don't understand. It's called Cursed, but it's great for all those girls that really want to just take off into a fairy tale land that has a lot going on. Marissa Meyer, she seems to just have this following that is just incredible, and we can't keep them on the shelf. She's great. That's all I can say. So that's it for me.
I've got two YAs to kind of end us off with. So first one is Our Crooked Hearts. And so Our Crooked Hearts it's part family story, it's part this kind of supernatural fantasy. Ivy is 17 years old. She's driving home with her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend, and the naked woman appears in front of their car, and they almost hit her. And it's terrifying. It's also really odd. And it's the first of a whole slew of really weird things that start to happen. So there's a dead rabbit that shows up in a driveway. There is this weird kind of concoction that Ivy's mother has buried in their yard. There are all these childhood memories that might be the most disturbing thing of all that sort of start to come back to Ivy, and that she starts to wonder what they mean and why her mom has always seemed a little bit different. What's going on there? And so it turns out that many years ago, when she was around Ivy's age, Ivy's mother began messing with some supernatural elements. And so the book starts to alternate between Ivy's point of view and Ivy's mother as a child as well, or as a teen. And you start to learn about what Ivy's mother got into and why, and how these elements that Ivy's mother released all these years ago are now trickling into Ivy's life as well. So it's an interesting mother-daughter story. It's an interesting, just kind of creepy supernatural. There's a little bit of a mystery. There are the two timelines that run parallel. So there's a lot going on. It's really beautiful. Ivy has some great friends helping her. Ivy's mother has some good friends as well in there. It'll take you by surprise many times over. So that's Our Crooked Hearts. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight today is Ain't Burned All That Bright. Ain't Burned All the Bright. And this one's by Jason Reynolds. He's a New York Times bestseller. He's also, he was an ambassador for children's and young adult literature for a while. He has taken a really interesting look at kind of a lot of the social justice issues that are coming up in modern times. So Jason Reynolds and his friend slash collaborator, Jason Griffin, have written this book that is 300 pages, but only 10 sentences. So it's largely kind of collage artwork. And it's written around the idea of breathing, of oxygen, of breath. So it's written in 3 breaths. And breath has meant a lot these last few years. There's George Floyd, there's COVID, there's just a lot of symbolism, a lot of kind of contemporary issues around breath. Jason Reynolds takes it all on. So there's this refrain that comes up. Again, it's narrated by this unnamed narrator. We know from the illustrations he's Black, we know he's a teenager, and we know from the story that he tells that he's living with his family, with this brother who is fixated on video games and just kind of keeping his tunnel vision in place, trying to shut out what's going on in the world. And then with his sister, who's really attuned to everything and wants to go out and protest George Floyd, wants to really sort of make her mark, take her stand. And this narrator has this refrain of, I'm sitting here and wondering why my mother won't change the channel, change the story, and why the world sort of won't change also. So why the news won't change, why my mother won't change the channel, why the news won't change the story, why the story won't change into something new. And the illustrations tell a lot of the story, really tell you what's going on. And it looks like an every hour rerun about how we won't change the world or the way we treat the world. So it makes us kind of take a good look at ourselves. It gives a glimpse into one child's sort of experience of the world around them. It's a thought-provoking one. It's a conversation starter. It would be a great one for a teenager and an adult to read together, or for several teens to read as kind of a book group, almost conversation. It's one that you're going to want to really talk to people about. And you're going to want to read it and then read the newspaper, look at the news, and you'll look at the world a little bit differently in some way after. So it's an absolutely breathtaking book and just really creative, really different, and definitely worth the read. It's a heavy one, so worth the read for the right reader.
If I might interject, I listened to it because he does the narrating and he reads it himself. And I think there are two other people that read it with him. And so it's in thirds and it's only 30 minutes to listen to. It is so powerful when you listen to it. It's almost like it was very hard because you could feel the distress and kind of the anger and the emotion in his voice when he was reading it. It's really, I mean, and then when I looked at the book, I was like, how am I going to read this with that same passion? And it was very difficult for me, to be honest with you, because I don't understand where he was coming from, because he's like, why? He was very angry that his mother kept watching the news over and over and over again. But it's yeah, either read it or listen to it or do both, because it's wild how he reads this story.
That is our roundup for the season. I'm going to stop the recording, and if anybody wants to turn on cameras and has any either questions or wants to share any recommendations of their own or anything, thank you all so much for joining us today, and I hope that you found a book for your reader.